Somewhere beneath the Sea of Okhotsk, in the freezing black waters off the Soviet coast, the United States Navy was listening. Not from a satellite, not from a spy plane, from a device clamped directly onto a Soviet military cable, sitting on the ocean floor in Soviet territory, recording their most classified communications. For years it worked perfectly. Then one man destroyed everything. The Cold War was a war of shadows, fought not just with missiles and armies, but with secrets. And in 1971, the National Security Agency believed they had found something extraordinary. A Soviet underwater communications cable running along the floor of the Sea of Okhotsk, linking a critical Soviet naval base to military command in Moscow. If they could tap it, they wouldn't just be listening at the door, they'd be sitting inside the room. The mission was called Operation Ivy Bells. And from the very beginning, it was unlike anything the U.S. had ever attempted. The USS Halibut, a specially modified nuclear submarine, was chosen to carry out the operation. Its crew had no idea what they were about to do. Navy divers were trained to descend in near-zero visibility, in water cold enough to kill an unprotected man in minutes, and physically attach a recording device to a live Soviet communications cable. No margin for error, no rescue if something went wrong. If they were caught, it could be considered an act of war. They found the cable, they attached the device, and they got away clean. For the next decade, the USS Halibut and later the USS Parche would return every few months, dropping divers down to retrieve the recordings and replace the tapes. What they pulled up was a goldmine. Soviet naval officers, believing their undersea cable was completely secure, spoke openly. Troop movements, weapons capabilities, strategic plans. The NSA was reading the Soviet military's mail, and Moscow didn't know it. It was one of the most successful intelligence operations in American history, and it should have stayed secret forever. Ronald Pelton was a 44-year-old former NSA communications analyst, brilliant, trusted, and deeply in debt. In 1980, 1 year after leaving the NSA, he walked into the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C., and offered to sell what he knew. He didn't hand over documents. He had nothing to hand over. What Pelton sold was his memory, and his memory was extraordinary. He told the Soviets everything about Ivy Bells, the cable, the location, the tapping device, the submarines. For approximately $35,000, Ronald Pelton handed the KGB one of America's most sensitive secrets. Soviet divers were dispatched to the Sea of Okhotsk almost immediately. They found the tapping pod exactly where Pelton told them it would be. They removed it, and they said nothing publicly, letting the Americans continue the operation, unaware it had been compromised, while the Soviets now knew every move being made. The operation continued for years, with the Americans believing it was still secure. The Soviets had turned America's greatest intelligence coup into their own counterintelligence victory. It wasn't until 1985 that the FBI closed in on Pelton. He was identified through a partial voice recording from a phone call he had made to the Soviet embassy years earlier. When agents confronted him, he talked. He told them nearly everything, perhaps believing cooperation would soften his fate. It didn't. In 1986, Ronald Pelton was convicted on 4 counts of espionage. He was sentenced to 3 concurrent life terms plus 10 years. He was released in 2015 after serving nearly 30 years. The tapping device recovered by Soviet divers was later put on public display in Moscow. a quiet, humiliating trophy. Operation Ivy Bells had cost America one of its most valuable intelligence windows into Soviet military thinking. The damage, the full damage, has never been completely declassified. Some of what was compromised may never be known. But here is what we do know. For nearly a decade, American sailors dove into the dark, into the cold, into enemy waters, doing something that had never been done before and risked everything to protect a country that would never know their names. They didn't lose to the Soviets, they lost to one of their own.